Hi guys, hold on for a second. Before we proceed to the video, I have something very important to tell you. Professor Jon V. Kofas has published his new book in collaboration with Little French Media, and the title of the book is Neoliberalism, Inequality, and Authoritarianism. This book details how neoliberalism impacts the geopolitical economy in the 21st century. You can buy it from Amazon, and the link is in the description. Thank you. Now let's proceed to the video.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a session on the ongoing tragedy in the Middle East, owing to a war that has been characterized by the World Court as well as a number of United Nations uh, representatives and governments around the world as genocide. This genocide, this genocidal war, which is almost a year old, now seems to be shifting and going toward southern Lebanon with allegedly Hezbollah as the target. The September 17th explosions of pagers and walkie talkies is unprecedented by a government using what amounts to state sponsored terrorism, according to a number of organizations, governments around the world that have stated so officially, including before the United Nations Security Council. The question is, why did Israel do this? This is hardly a new strategy. The strategy of Israel has been to widen the war, to drag Iran and to divide the Middle East, to drag Iran into this war and to divide the Middle East, and to get get the United States to become involved as it did in Iraq. Israel had a hand in um, influencing US foreign policy during the Bush administration with regard to the invasion in Iraq. It was in the interest of Israel to eliminate another regional rival, namely Iraq, just as it has been the long-standing interest of Israel to be the dominant uh, country determining the regional balance of power in the Middle East and coming to terms with the conservative Gulf states, especially Saudi Arabia, something that has not, of course, been achieved. They have tried that. So this act that started on the 17th, it continued on the 18th, and then, of course, there were bombardments, not just of Hezbollah targets, as the Western media would have its audience believe, but actually civilians, including Beirut, suburbs of Beirut. Okay, so the record speaks for itself where the targets are. And let me just say something about the alarming use of this new level, this new phase of warfare, namely techno warfare, using everything from cell phone to walkie-talkies and pagers and so forth. This obviously raises very serious questions about the credibility of products, electronic products, in the marketplace on a world scale. And it uh, it does alarm people um, because it makes them uneasy, not only because states can use that, but it alarms people because they know that this is a copycat situation. Down the road, anyone, literally anyone, could copycat this kind of tactic and use it against any target. So, this is indeed alarming. Um, Even more alarming is the relative absence of criticism by Western countries. Now, France and Germany, especially France, President Macron did come out and he did state that not only is he against escalation, which even the United States says they're against escalation, but they're solidly behind Israel. But he did say that he is um, interested in protecting the sovereignty of Iran and of Lebanon, and that he is concerned about the sovereignty of Lebanon, meaning that crossing the line. And Macron, by the way, the fact is that France has been behind Israel. But on this particular issue, considering that Lebanon was a French mandate from 1920 to 1943, a semi colony, in other words, um, and has historic ties. France has historic ties to Lebanon. Um, the French government has decided that on this particular matter of techno warfare, that it will be on the side of the government in Beirut, and that it will do whatever it can. It remains to be seen because public pronouncements are one thing, action is different. That's we look at what people do, not what they say. They can say whatever they want. The U.S. says they're interested in ceasefire for months and months and months, but we have seen no evidence that it's willing to act to achieve ceasefire. Now, um, I want to bring up. I'm a historian. I used to teach the history of the Middle East when I was in higher education. I'm now retired, but the I'm going to bring up one point here, which is that the reaction of the Western media, especially in the U.S., but the Western media in general, that Israel is defending itself in going this next level with techno warfare, exploding these devices, which indiscriminately hit anyone. Because the hand devices, when you have a hand device, you pass it on to a child, you pass it on to anyone. And children were killed, by the way. Children were killed. Okay? Um, so we have a situation where the allegedly the claim is officially, well, we're targeting terrorists, Hezbollah. However, the victims have been innocent civilians, including children, as has been reported, as has the testimony before the United Nations by UN officials, as well as representatives of other governments have clearly stated. Okay, so what we have is a situation where the state is using um, tactics that amount to terrorism. I read an interesting article yesterday by an American Jewish professor at one of the schools in Northern Virginia, who stated that unfortunately this unleashes um, new fears on a world scale, by the way. Techno devices are all over the world. Techno devices can be modified. And no, people won't feel safe. And again, I reiterate that they lose faith in the credibility of corporations selling these devices because they have no way of knowing if someone manipulated the device and targeted. It could have been accidentally, but targeted, supposedly here, but the result is on the other side, someone else gets killed. So this is a very serious situation. Now, the question is, did Israel do this? Did Israel do this because it is concerned about Hezbollah? Hezbollah, which means the party of God, is a product of the post Iranian revolutionary period. It started in the early 80s and it really thrived by the mid 1980s. Hezbollah did not exist before the Iranian revolution. Okay? Now, like I said, I used to teach the history of the Middle East. So here's a piece of history. In 1955, the second prime minister of Israel, Moshe Sharet, wrote in his diary that Moshe Dayan, the army chief of staff, proposed at that time in 1955, no Hezbollah in 1955, none, proposed that Israel do something to attract someone, recruit someone from the Lebanese military, a mid level officer who would be sympathetic to Israel, preferably a Christian. And if not, if that person could not be persuaded, then they would buy him, in other words, pay him off, you know, buy the person, pay off the person, and that person would rule Lebanon on behalf of the Maronite community, which is the Christian community in Lebanon. Lebanon is a multi religious country, by the way, with Shia Muslims, Sunni Muslims, Druze, Maronites. So we have, and some Orthodox. So we have a few different faiths there. And Moshe Dayan proposed doing this so that Lebanon, to the south of Israel, would be allied and they would be in the back pocket of Israel. These two people, Moshe Sharet and Dayan, also talked about destabilizing the Middle East by periodically provoking crises. Exactly what they have been doing, by the way, since then. No Hezbollah at that time. I repeat, there was no Hezbollah at that time. The strategy of provocation would target especially Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt. They further proposed annexing the southern part as a buffer zone so that the Zionist state would feel more secure. Okay? So this was in the mid 1950s. Now, because I'm going to have a session, a different session, at some point in the future, shortly, on Lebensraum, a German word which means living space, a theoretical construct that emerges in the 1990s, concurrently with the popularization of social Darwinism and Zionism, by the way, I would argue that the Zionist movement was influenced by social Darwinism and the theoretical assumptions of Lebersham's living space, which, by the way, the Germans tried to practice from the reign of Kaiser Wilhelm II in the 1890s, all the way, and of course, through the Third Reich. And of course, Hitler took it to new heights. Lebersham is a racist ideology linked to geography. And again, like I said, I'm going to have an entire session on that. I'll explain it in detail. Zionist ideologues were influenced by this ideology. And Lebersham simply means that to assert an ethnic group to assert itself and to prevail and to survive and to thrive needs more living space. And it takes it by force and necessary, and it eliminates by force and necessary people who are in the way, the people who are there already, and takes their land. Okay? So this is the reality. This is 1950s when Moshe Sharet and Moshe Dayan were um involved in all of this. This was planning. This is, they didn't do anything at the time. But they talked about provocations, and throughout its history, the state of Israel has in fact provoked crisis. So there is a long-standing pattern of provocation to destabilize so that they can take advantage of that and pursue Lebanon, pursue the living space uh, goal of accumulating more land at the expense of the native people, namely Palestinians. Okay, who, by the way, many of them left in 1948, and many of them went to Lebanon, um, as well as other countries, and as well as during the 1967 war. So Lebanon has a Palestinian uh, population and ancestors of Palestinians from that time. Okay, so this is the historical context from which no one can get away because it's the record. Now, beguiling rationalizations are for public relations purposes and are not part of the historical record. Okay, therefore, politicians to try to mobilize support for their cause, which is fine. That's what they do. Okay. Um, I want to move on from that and tell you a little bit about Lebanon, a little bit about the crisis of Lebanon, and of course, a number of analysts since the walkie-talkie and pager explosions this past week, and then followed by bombings by the IDF of Lebanon, have mentioned this as well as government representatives at the United Nations Security Council, by the way. Representatives of governments at the council pointed this out. Lebanon, unfortunately, right now has a prime minister. His name is Najib Mikati, who is a billionaire. That's his business if he's a billionaire, except that he and the oligarchy of Lebanon that he represents have been responsible for the economic dislocation of Lebanon, especially since October 2019. I'm sorry, since October 2019, when there was a major crisis, the economy collapsed, owing to a banking crisis, which this oligarchy is accused of creating because they were looting the central bank, by the way, and there have been formal charges by the French government against some of these people, including the prime minister, accused of fraud and money laundering. Allegations, he has denied them, that's all true. However, Lebanon has 40% of its population below the poverty level. It has 20% officially, unofficially, it's much higher. 20% of its population unemployed. Okay. This is a country that is a mess already. And on top of this, we get um, the situation here with Israel provoking this crisis by going into a new phase of warfare, techno war through these pagers and walkie talkies. The question is, why would Israel shift the genocidal war from Gaza? It's not that it's ended, by the way. I don't want to give the wrong impression. It's continuing. Read the newspapers and you'll find out, online magazines or whatever, you'll find that out immediately. Um, why would it shift so many troops and shift the focus towards southern Lebanon? There have been a number of, if you follow again the logic of Israel, Israel has made, and its allies, especially the pro Zionist lobby in the United States, and pro Zionists who want a conflict with Iran. They're starving for war with Iran, just as just as they influenced the Bush administration in going to war against Iraq, and the nonsense about weapons of mass destruction when there were none. That's official, that's part of the record. Okay, no propaganda, part of the record. The war against Iraq, carried out allegedly because they had weapons of mass destruction, was of course carried out under false pretenses. And Iraq, everybody knows, had nothing to do with Al Qaeda. Iraq was a separate issue. Israel wanted the United States dragged into a war against Iraq to weaken Iran and eliminate Iraq as an anti-Israel rival. And at the same time, if the U.S. was, as it was obviously for 20 years, and it still has a presence there in Iraq, right next door, it would contain Iran. So Israel's and America's foreign policy geopolitical goals converged. Why would the United States and Israel pursue this? The Both, of course, have an interest in destabilization of the Middle East, keeping it weak and divided, and containing Iran, and trying to get, if they can, and so far they haven't succeeded, um, to get Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf states, as well as others, whoever they can get, to basically um, have to ameliorate relations with them. Uh, they have tried in the past, and of course, that has collapsed because the two-state solution is a precondition for Saudi Arabia as well as the others in order for them to ameliorate relations with Israel. And this is Publicly known, publicly stated. The United States knows this. Everybody knows this. Now, the U.S. and Israel also benefit because the war economy continues. Both Israel and the United States benefit in um, their defense companies benefit, and they keep the focus on the military solution aspect of the problem instead of seeking diplomatic solutions. Although President Macron, by the way, I watched the whole speech of the French president, stated that this, if ever there was a time to have a diplomatic solution, this is it, with Israel going to techno war against Lebanon. The U.S. says the same thing, but they have, in reality, we can't accept vacuous rhetoric when in fact they say that, but then at the same time they have just given a directive to send more weapons to Israel. That contradicts the rhetoric. You see, you have to have solid evidence that the West is indeed serious about ceasefire, about no war, not expanding the war throughout the Middle East, not violating the sovereignty of Lebanon, as the French president said, okay, on record, not using techno war against civilians, no matter what they say. Oh, yes, we took out a commander. They did take out a number of Hezbollah um, top people. Of course they did. Along with them, they killed a lot of civilians. Silence about that. The focus is how many of the Hezbollah officials have we gotten? What about the children you just killed? Sorry, um, casualties of war. So the fact is that the situation here is partly driven by the fact that weapons manufacturers have an interest in this. Um, the we can't get away from the pro-Zionist elements from the Israeli lobby to in Washington to the APAC to a number of Jewish and non-Jewish, by the way, a lot of non-Jewish pro-Zionist elements in Wall Street. They support all of this, okay, unapologetically. We also can't get away from the fact that right now there are twin wars. There are two wars. There's another one in Ukraine. That one is on the verge of World War III because this time, with the long-range ballistic missiles that the U.S. wants uh, to provide Ukraine and give them permission to use against Russian soil, this time the Kremlin has its back on the wall, and there are rumors that they're getting ready to test hydrogen bombs. And they have stated on record that those bombs can reach any European capital within 3 minutes. This is where we're at. So the madness in Israel that Israel is pursuing in Gaza and now in southern Lebanon, that madness is part of a wider madness of militarism as a way of life by the Western countries in these proxy wars. I regard both Ukraine and Israel as proxy wars. Without the United States and its junior partners, this would not be happening. Vacuous rhetoric aside, oh yes, we want peace. Um, when you look at the press conferences of the White House and the State Department, it's unfortunate, by the way, because even the most pro Western journalists now, and just this morning I read even some former military people are saying, well, I think we may have gone too far with this. Um, they're realizing the madness of all this. What is the goal here? What is the goal? Nuclear war, nuclear holocaust. Is that it? Is that the goal? Okay, then let's have nuclear holocaust in the human race, in life on the planet. Um, Now, I want to point out, I want to give you some details because there's a lot of material about who was really behind these devices. And I'm not interested, by the way, at all in military. For more than 3 decades, when I taught in higher education, I used to tell my students when they asked technical questions on military that I've never had an interest in military history. But the issue that is important here is the techno device. Who made the techno devices? Clearly, it starts with Taiwan, a company that licensed a Hungarian consulting company by an individual, an Italian Hungarian lady, who is the CEO, um, British educated, with links to Bulgaria and Norway, with millions of dollars floating, and yet no employees of the company. And also, she claimed, "Hey, I didn't make. I'm just a go-between. Our company didn't make these devices." No one is claiming that they made the devices. There have been reports that behind the devices is Mossad, the intelligence agency of Israel, that they apparently were responsible. I don't know who. I have no idea unless I see it in the news. Who really made the devices? Some 4,000 of them, killing 37 people initially, and injuring roughly 3,000, with more to come, by the way, because as the Ministry of Health of Lebanon has pointed out, a number of the injured are in critical condition in Lebanese hospitals. Critical condition, which means they may die. Okay. Now, the device maker isn't that important. The entity behind all of this seems to be Mossad. I don't know. It seems to be Mossad. They will not obviously admit that. U.S. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio Cortez from New York City has asked for an investigation. She wants to know what was the role of the United States. Everybody knows it's not a secret that that Mossad has a long-standing relationship with the CIA. They collaborate. The CIA collaborates with a lot of intelligence agencies. That's what they do. They're soldiers. That's their job. Okay. The question, as the article I read yesterday by this Jewish American University professor in Virginia, is why are my tax dollars used to pay for state-sponsored terrorism, and what is the role of my government in all of this? That's a legitimate question. Now, if uh, a citizen is not allowed to even ask that question, to even raise that question, then we're not a democracy. We don't live in a democracy. Then we should stop all pretenses about an open society, about a civilized democratic society that wishes to spread its model of democracy to the rest of the world. It's an authoritarian society. If you do not allow freedom of speech, if you have censorship, if you go that route, fine, declare it openly and claim, by the way, so people know, at least you know where you stand. We're an authoritarian society, we're a dictatorship. We don't allow any of that. So, like I said, so people know not to say anything so they won't be facing the consequences. In any case, the the device issue is important. Um, like I said, a lot of question marks. It seems both the New York Times and Reuters are pointing to, obviously, Mossad. They're pointing that way. Nothing, no one has admitted anything so far. It's interesting, by the way, that the US press has actually attacked Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, the congresswoman from New York City, for even raising the question as a representative of her district in New York, saying, and by the way, she has been very lenient toward Israel. I want to make sure, look at her voting record. She's been very lenient toward Israel. Um, and she raises this question because this is a new level of warfare. This is techno warfare that is, as a number of people, including in the United Nations, have said, state sponsored terrorism. You're using this device. You don't know who's going to pass the device to. He is a father. He may be a member of Hezbollah or an associate of Hezbollah. True enough. And we'll talk about Hezbollah. What is Hezbollah, by the way? Maybe I should talk about it right now. I should point out Hezbollah is a Shia organization linked to Iran, concentrated in southern Lebanon. One of the reasons, by the way, that Hezbollah has had such popularity is because from the 1982 invasion, bombardment, I should say, of Israel, and then the retaliation of Hezbollah in 1983, I think in April, both and then in October, first in the U.S. embassy and then U.S. barracks and multinational barracks, multi-ethnic barracks, Western barracks, included French soldiers as well. They have been active in resisting Israel, supporting Palestinians, and Western powers supporting Israel. Hezbollah has been a divisive force. Hezbollah is not made of Boy Scouts. It does have a paramilitary wing to it. It does carry out um, unconventional warfare. That's all true. There's no point make trying to get around that. That's what it is. It is set up as an Iranian financed organization to resist um, Israel and help the Palestinians. And like I said, there are a lot of Palestinians in Lebanon, at least descendants of Palestinians from 48 and 67, others that have come since then. So that's what they are. That's who they are. Now they have been at odds with um, some of the other groups, the more conservative groups, especially the Druze and the Christians. Um, and in the last 20 years or so, they have integrated into the political mainstream and represent, and they represent a major block of popular support. So they have substantial support, political support, and popular support in Lebanon. One of the goals of Israel and the West has been to divide the Lebanese people so they can turn against Hezbollah. And one of the goals of Israel in doing this, going this techno war route, although it has backfired, um, was to get a lot of the Lebanese people who are against Hezbollah, they're not at least friendly toward the Hezbollah, although make no mistake about it, Hezbollah has enormous support in Lebanon, to turn against them so they can divide and so they can prevail. and also so they can present the genocidal war back in Gaza that has been going on for nearly a year. You see, this is all part of a larger struggle against terrorists like Hezbollah. So it's really conventional war. It's not that different from what Ukraine is doing with Russia, when in fact it's very different. Okay? So, and Hezbollah, by the way, has been engaged in a lot of social development programs. They help people because this is a country, the Lebanese people, this is a country with 40%, I'm going to repeat that, 40% of the population below the poverty level. An official rate of unemployment, 20%. Hezbollah is also in the business of aiding people, providing aid for people. Okay. This is also a country with enormous level of corruption, including allegations. I emphasize, nothing's proved so far, but there are papers in the French judicial system against the current prime minister for fraud and money laundering. Allegations. He has denied them. Fine. This is a government that has been historically swimming in corruption. The oligarchy of the government has been using the neoliberal model, the model of deregulation, government privatization of public assets, subsidies of government to to the capitalist class. They've been using all of that to legally and illegally, that is within their own laws that they write, and in any case to benefit themselves, to transfer income from the bottom up. This is why we have nearly half the population below poverty. Now, here, this is the context. I'm not, by the way, defending Hezbollah. I know some people are going to say, "Oh, a supporter of Hezbollah." No, this is the context. This is the reality of what people live in. They live in this country where there is chronic corruption. It ranks, if you go into the internet and you look at where it ranks in 100, I think I looked at just this morning. I think they ranked 144th in corruption out of 180 countries. They're they're very corrupt. It's a very corrupt country. They're linked to the United Arab Emirates. They're linked to Saudi interests. Saudis have been enormously influential in trying to manipulate the domestic political scene in Lebanon. Okay. And this is the context. You see where Hezbollah fits in here. This is where, uh, this is the context that Hezbollah operates in. I'm not surprised that they have as many seats in parliament as they do. I'm not surprised they have the level of popular support. I'm also not surprised that there is opposition. Of course, there would be. Lebanon is divided into several um, religious and ethnic groups. It's true. Now, I want to point out a couple of other things that are important here. Um, the and that is the from the Arab Spring outbreak and the outbreak of the Syrian civil war, the so-called Syrian civil war, um, where the U.S. Basically sought that as an opportunity to topple Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, by the way. That created another crisis within Lebanon and divisions within Lebanon because Hezbollah was on the side of Assad, with the US, Israel, Saudi Arabia on the side of the jihadists. trying to topple the government. That is not on the side of the Rishikadas directly, uh, but they sought the same goals. ISIS had the same goals as Israel, the United States, and Saudi Arabia. And up to a point, so did Turkey. And Iran and Hezbollah were on the side of Assad. They were supporting Assad. And so was Moscow, the Kremlin. So, and we know what happened there. The U.S. retreated. They still have troops there, but they retreated, by the way. Um, and no matter the claims about the U.S. defeating ISIS, um, you can read for yourself how ISIS was weakened in Syria. It was it had to do more with Russia and Iran, and it had a lot less to do with the United States, whose goal was really to topple Assad, and that was the goal of Israel. And Israel, by the way, this past week, when it had these techno bombings, also hit Syria. I want to make sure that you understand that. Syria has also been on the target list of Israel, and all along, it has been periodically bombing it, bombing specific targets, saying, "Okay, that you have pro-Iranian elements there. We're bombing them, but really bombing Syria and anybody who's in the way." So you have this is the sort of situation. So it's much more complex and complicated than it appears. Um, on the surface, it appears okay. You have the good guys, Israel, the United States, and its allies in the West, and then the excess of evil, which is Iran, Russia, China, by the way, those are allies, we know. And of course, the um, the groups, the rebel groups that Iran supports and finances, it's no secret, and that one of those is Hezbollah, the other is Hamas, the other are the Houthi rebels down in Yemen. Now, that's all true. That's all true. The question is, what are the goals here? The goals is to help on the part of the axis of evil is to seek stability in the Middle East, not instability, which, by the way, if you study US foreign policy in the Middle East, instability as a way of life has been the rule of law. That's how they have operated. Divide and conquer. 19th century imperialist concept, divide and conquer, has been applied. Israel has followed that model. Israel has followed that model. Dividing and conquering is also the Israeli model. It's also one of the reasons that it attacked. It went to techno war with Lebanon. And like I said, this is already looking like it's going to backfire. Not that the U.S. is going to abandon Israel at all. I think that the U.S. is a strategic partner, and no matter who is president, the U.S. will stay with Israel. And no matter what Israel does, no matter what it does, even if Israel were to, hypothetically speaking, do something against U.S. interests, and it has, by the way, the U.S. government would still support it. It's just that simple. That's the record of the U.S. And one of the explanations by analysts, of course, and you can judge for yourself to the degree. I think it's more complex than just the Israeli lobby. Is the Israeli lobby and the money that it pours and the pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist elements on Wall Street, combined with the defense industry, combined with banking interests that have invested in Israel and Israeli companies. Um, yeah, it's much more complex. But the fact is, the US has been, and I see no reason that it will change, doesn't matter who, whether Kamala Harris or Donald Trump win the White House, they will remain strategic partners, and they will not at any time all of a sudden embrace Bashar al Assad or Iran, in other words, Syria or Iran or anyone else. They are interested in the Saudi money, by the way, because the Saudis are going heavily toward China and BRICS and abandoning very quickly the dollar. But that's also part of the reason that the United States is supporting military solutions as a way of retaining its hegemony in the Middle East, because China economically and Russia geopolitically are moving in. And the US is using Israel as a proxy here to uh, to achieve its containment goal, to at least slow down China's influence and Russia's influence. Russia's influence I can see slowing down a little bit. China's economic influence is not, with BRICS behind it, is not going. That's going to accelerate. Now, I want to. We only have a few minutes. I want to have some concluding remarks about the situation here. We're coming up on 1 year of the genocidal war in Israel. This is not a conventional war. I cannot call it a conventional war because it's not a conventional war. The Egyptian representative at the United Nations General Assembly made an interesting speech the other day. He pointed out that the Israeli representative got up and he um, denigrated the United Nations. He castigated the members of the United Nations. He dismissed the United Nations as a circus. You know, this kind of arrogance of disrespecting international institutions, especially the United Nations and its sub agencies, the International Criminal Court, the International Criminal Court of Justice, the um, the sub agencies of the United Nations, which include humanitarian agencies, those investigating conditions, um, using some of those people who are on in Palestinian lands as targets, indiscriminately, on occasion hitting them as well, by the way, um, making them targets. This kind of disrespect for international law, also, the kind of defiance is indeed, as the Chinese representative at the United Nations Security Council pointed out, unprecedented. No one goes to the United Nations and talks like that. The question is, why does Israel do it? And Israel is a tiny country, by the way. The planet has 8 billion people. The Israelis are less than 6 million. 6 million. Okay. This tiny country is really not the tiny country that it appears. It is the Western bloc behind it. The defiance is not Israel. The defiance is the West. The West has turned against international organizations that it has created, that International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice. It has turned against its own organizations. It has turned against international law. And yet, it argues that it supports the rule of law. Not a word about techno bombings, which a number of governments have no problem saying this is state sponsored terrorism on the record. France, an ally of the United States and Israel, came out and said, enough is enough. This is a violation of Lebanese sovereignty. Yet, no one is stopping Israel. And one of the outcries, and next week, by the way, there'll be more discussion on what is really the UN all about. Um, there's no stopping of Israel because the United States is using Israel. And one could argue the US is using Israel, but actually Israel is using the United States because of the Israeli lobby and the pro-Zionist group. So it's a vicious circle. Who's using whom? Um, I think that we are indeed in a time of serious crisis of these twin wars, Ukraine and Israel. These twin wars, behind which is the refusal of the West, with the US leading on this one, the refusal to find a diplomatic solution for the constructive harmony, peace, and advancement of everyone. This does not mean that anyone's rights or interests have to be diminished. It does mean that compromising to find a solution will be in the interests of all. China, I have said this before, I'm making it again a point to bring it up, has said, let us explore a diplomatic solution. One of the things that I learned when I was studying diplomatic history at the PhD level before I started teaching diplomatic history in the 1970s was that diplomacy is the first thing you consider, not the last. War is the last thing you consider. Historically, going back to ancient times, a government considers diplomacy first, not last. We are at a point where things are turned on their head now. Let's go to war first, see what happens. Things go wrong, and they could go very wrong, by the way. Even serious analysts who are dead set against um, both the Palestinians and the Russians are saying, okay, maybe we should really. I was surprised some of the names I saw recently of people who are saying maybe we should really consider diplomacy now. Yeah, maybe that should be a consideration. Um, right at this point, I don't see it. One hopes that Lebanon is just a lesson that the West, the collective West, presses on Israel to come to the negotiating table, seek a solution, put put everything on the table. Now, if the ultimate goal is Lebanon, as I said, get rid of all the Palestinians from what Israel calls Israel, in other words, from the Palestinian lands, West Bank and Gaza, get rid of them, send them to Africa, send them to Latin America. We don't care where you send them. Pay Bolivia off, pay Uganda off, send them over there. If that's the ultimate goal, they're not going anywhere, by the way. That's not going anywhere. If the 19th century, late 19th century to Third Reich concept of Lebensraum is the ultimate goal, they're not going to achieve anything. The Germans did not. They went nowhere with that. Israel will not either. I thank you for joining me. I ask you to subscribe to this channel that Asad Alim is managing. This is an educational channel. It's designed to present material from an analytical perspective, free of polemics, free of hype, free of um, uh, the kind of populism that and hyperbole that comes with an agenda, people who have an agenda. My only goal, I'm an academic, my only goal is to analyze um, events on as much of a realistic basis as possible. And that's the only goal I have. I have no other goal. I thank you. I ask you to write comments and to join this channel and to follow other programs of this channel. The next topic will be Lebensraum from a very analytical perspective with its history, looking at Germany, how the U.S., of course, the frontier thesis influenced Lebanon, and then, of course, looking at Israel. Thank you again.